Bledsoe was arrested.
Patrick Montgomery was in court.
Jonathan Manapa will stay in federal custody.
No, I don't take responsibility at all.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. So 65-year-old Oregon resident and Army veteran Reed Christensen traveled to D.C. with his son. And following Trump's speech, they headed to the Capitol. Christensen knew he wasn't allowed on Capitol grounds, as evidenced by a photo that was found on his phone. Someone had taken a picture of him in front of the fencing that was surrounding the Capitol before it got trampled. And right next to him was an area closed sign affixed to the fence. Christensen and his son, though, they followed the mob to the building. They approached a police line where others were throwing objects at the officers and becoming increasingly hostile. Sergeant Carolyn Edwards was part of that police line, and she described Christensen's actions in sworn testimony. She said, quote, he seemed to be kind of going up and down the line, trying to, I would almost say, like, look for weaknesses. He was kind of holding on to bike racks, you know. Every now and then he would start pushing and pulling. So at one point, Christensen grabbed onto the police barricades and he started pulling on it more aggressively. So Sergeant Edwards repeatedly ordered him to stop. And Christensen told her, quote, "Shut up, lady." Then he said, quote, "I called you lady, which clearly you aren't." He later referred to Sergeant Edwards and other female officers as, quote, "Capitol tour guides." Yeah, again, it is so obvious why some of these people support a sexist sexual predator like Donald Trump. Like attracts like. Anyway, after that, Christensen became more forceful in his attempt to pull the barricade away from the police. And Sergeant Edwards and two other officers tried to yank it away from him. And then another officer saw what was going down, so he came up and he warned Christensen that he needed to let go. And because Christensen refused, that officer sprayed Christensen with pepper spray. So initially, Christensen held on. He eventually, though, let go. And then he lunged at Sergeant Edwards because, of course, you know, he tries to physically assault the lone female officer. Typical. So another officer stepped up. That officer also sprayed Christensen, and this time it landed in his eyes. And then finally, Christensen backed off and he retreated into the crowd. Well, even after his rude, sexist behavior toward Sergeant Edwards, she later handed him a bottle of water to flush his eyes out. So she proved she is a far better person than he could ever be. Anyway, a little while later, Christensen watched as another officer was trying to keep the barricades in place. He was fighting with other people in the mob. So while another member of the mob sprayed that officer with chemicals, Christensen used that moment of weakness to strike. First, he grabbed that officer's arm to try to, prevent him from holding the barricade. And when the officer tried to spray Christensen pushed past him, pushed past a different barricade that was nearby, and he charged at that officer. So he was seen on body cam footage. He was reaching toward the officer, and he was seen on video grabbing the officer. Then the officer sprayed Christensen with pepper spray, but it was too late at that point. His breach of the barricades caused the mob to surge forward, and the violence just escalated. And Christensen then moved on to assault another officer. An officer with the last name of English was attempting to keep the barricades in place. Christensen approached this officer from behind. He shoved him in the center of his back. Then Christensen was seen on video raising his forearms in front of his face, almost like in a defensive posture, but maybe as a battering ram. And he charged at a fourth officer named Ernst. So Christensen grabbed Officer Ernst's arm. He started to wrestle with him. And then Ernst tried to push Christensen away, but other officers had to step in and they sprayed Christensen again to stop the attack. Still, he was undeterred. Christensen charged at and assaulted a fifth officer named Cook Barnes. Christensen shoved that officer in the chest before he was surrounded by officers who sprayed him yet again with pepper spray. So at that point, Christensen's son stepped in and he grabbed his father and he pulled him away from the police line. So the two of them finally left the area. And the damage was done. Within 15 minutes, the police line completely collapsed. The violence ramped up. So he was a huge part of that. So following the Capitol attack, Christensen self-published a book. This was about his time at the Capitol. This is a new one for me. Of course, he admitted very little as to what he did wrong. He conceded that he grabbed the barricades and that he wanted to enter the Capitol. He conveniently left out, though, his 5 attacks on 5 different officers. Christensen also tried to use his January 6th participation in a run for governor of the state of Oregon. And in interviews, he continued to minimize his actions at the Capitol. Needless to say, didn't work out too well for him. He did not even win his Republican primary in that race. So Christensen was arrested on April 25th of 2021, and in a superseding indictment, he was charged with civil disorder, 3 counts of assaulting officers, entering a restricted building or grounds, disorderly conduct in a restricted building or grounds, and 2 counts of physical violence. I should point out, Christensen wasn't charged with assaulting Sergeant Edwards for some reason, and then his 5th and final assault wasn't discovered until after his trial. So yes, he refused a plea deal, he opted for a jury trial, and in September of 2023, Christensen was found guilty on all counts. Unfortunately, not enough of them, but based on even one of the assault convictions, Christensen faced up to 8 years in prison, 3 years of probation, and $250,000 in fines. However, the prosecutor requested 5 years in prison, 3 years of probation, and $2,000 in restitution. This should have been at least double, considering how many officers he assaulted, the fact that he refused to admit his guilt and take a plea, the way he downplayed everything. Surprisingly, though, this guy doesn't appear to have a criminal record, or at least he didn't. At the sentencing hearing, Christensen continued to lie about his actions at the Capitol, despite all of his crimes being recorded, all of his crimes being on video. Christensen also told the judge that he believes in law and order, and he said, quote, "I'm not planning on demonstrations after this," and quote, "I have no problem obeying the rules of America." U.S. District Judge Royce Lamberth presided over Christensen's case, and he told him, quote, "The court must send a message and can't let people just walk away." And then Judge Lamberth acknowledged that a prison term at his age can be, quote, "tough," but he said it was necessary. With that, Christensen was sentenced to 46 months in prison, 3 years of probation, a fine of $20,000, and $2,000 in restitution. Nowhere near what it should have been, nowhere near what he should have received, but at least he's going to be locked up for the next election. I just hope there are some female guards at his prison. I hope they have nice, big, fat batons, and I hope he talks to them the way he spoke to Sergeant Edwards. Yeah, wish we could get that on tape. All right. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. Please like this video, share it, become a subscriber if you have not. Please donate if you possibly can. Links are below in the description box on YouTube and the podcast. Truly appreciate it. It helps to keep the show moving forward. Love you all. Take care. I'll talk with you soon.